Hello boys and girls, welcome to my channel. I'm for Classic and welcome to BenchART. So today, what I do have in here, it is again Assassin's Creed Shadows running on the RX 6700 XT. So it's not the first time that I do a video about these on this card, but the first video was a benchmark, the benchmark tool inside the game, and this time it is more of a gameplay test. Alright, just for you to have a kind of an idea, I decided to took a kind of a big walk, horse ride and battle inside of some nice environments that Assassin's Creed Shadows have. And let's start with what is recommended by Ubisoft for this card. So in case you did look to the system requirements, if you have an RX 6700 XT, it does say there that the recommended setting for you to play, it is to play at median 1080p while using upscaling. And that's exactly what I've done, but I've changed some things. So I'm using 1080p median, yes. I'm using upscaling, yes. I'm using TAAU in its quality mode instead of native. But I took the liberty to raise the texture streaming to ultra and virtual textures to high because we have enough VRAM to spare. And the results are quite good. So basically we are above 60 frames per second all the time, despite the 1% lows are under than 60. I believe that it might have been some frame times while traversing the world that does some kind of micro stuttering and makes the 1% lows at lower than 60. But the overall feeling of the game, it's very smooth. And if you lock the game to 60 frames per second and use VSync in case you have a 60 Hz monitor, let me tell you that it's very stable and you barely see any frame time issue, which is pretty good. So this 1080p medium doesn't have any ray tracing, and maybe it is what is comparable to what PlayStation 5 is and Xbox Series X is mostly using in its actually don't. In fact, PS5 and Xbox Series X in its performance mode, which is the 60 frames per second target, doesn't have any ray tracing, just like we don't have it in this setting. But I believe the internal resolution is higher than what we are using in here. But we will get there in a minute. Let's just get into this fighting section, just for you to have an idea how it runs. Unfortunately, all these comparisons aren't really apples to apples, mostly because despite loading the same save file, the weather system is sometimes different. So in some runs there was sun, in some runs there was no wind, in some runs it was very foggy and raining. So it was really hard to do kind of an apples to apples comparison. And in fact, it's always difficult to replicate obviously the same fight or the same place where you are looking at. So it's kind of a tough call, but still it should be able to tell us the difference when comparing between multiple settings. And that's exactly what I have done in here. So in the left, we have the exact same settings, but this time around I'm using ray tracing plus hair strands, and it still runs above 60, but it does drop sometimes. It's good if you have a variable refresh rate monitor. At the middle we have DI settings, okay, also with ray tracing and hair strands and using upscaling. And on the right we have 1080p high with ray tracing but without any upscaling. So basically on the left we have the exact same settings but with ray tracing and hair strandings. The middle we have the eye settings and also ray tracing hair strandings. Both of these two are with upscaling, but on the right we have the exact same settings as the middle one but without upscaling. And as you can see, the only one that stays above 60 most of the time, let me just tell you that it's most of the time, it's really the left one. Alright, the median settings with ray tracing and hair strands and using upscaling through TAAU in its quality mode. I also took the approach to see how the game runs with maximum settings at 1080p, and despite it looks absolutely beautiful, it is under than 30 frames per second. Alright, so moving on to 1440p. I'm going to again try the median settings without any ray tracing or air strands, and again with textures maxed out. And in the upscaling, I'm using TAAU in its balanced mode instead of using its quality mode. This should be more and less in line with what PS5 and Xbox Series X offers. All right, since I'm assuming that the TAA balance it does use around 80 something P's upscale to 1440p, and as you can see, it is running above 60. I'm going to assume that it won't be running like this in all the time of events. I'm not really sure about how the console does. What I know is that it adjusts dynamically the internal resolution, so it can get lower than those 800p. But in this case, it seems to be very in line with what is done in the consoles. And still, it is running very properly. So if you are running the game at 1440p, my median settings, it is again without ray tracing. It is again my recommended setting. All right, this is clearly running very well, given the age that this GPU have. Keep in mind that this GPU have pretty much around 40-year-old, I guess, and this is a title that kind of pushes a lot. I mean, of the hardware. I know that we are not using ray tracing. I know that we are upscaling from a very low resolution, but still, the visuals at the display here are actually very, very good for the settings that we are using. So I think I'm just going to skip ahead to other resolutions that I mean to other settings that I did try at 1440p, just like what I've done at 1080p. Okay, just like at 1080p, I did use the exact same settings in here. The only difference is on the median settings, I decided to keep up with the TAAU balanced, while on the high settings, I did use TAAU in its quality mode, alright, which is essentially around 950p. On the right, and again, I'm not using any upscaling, and it should be a good setting if you want to achieve an experience above than 30. So if you want to lock the game at 30 frames per second, probably going with 1440p high settings with ray tracing without any upscaling should do the trick. But if you want to have some overhead, some margin, in case there is a more demanding scene, you can still use TAAU in its quality mode, which should upscale from something above the 900p. If you have a variable refresh rate screen, my suggestion it is median settings, ray tracing plus air strands plus TAAU on its balanced mode, because it drops below than 60, but it kind of remains mostly above than 50 frames per second, so it's a very good setting. Now to end up this video, I'm going to try out 4K, and my recommended setting for this one, it is again to go with the median settings, again with textures on max, and using TAAU in its performance mode. So essentially, you are kind of upscaling from 1080p, I believe, to 4K, using median settings and using maximum textures. Unfortunately, it's not possible to lock the game at 60 frames per second using these settings, but we are still very, very far away from the 30s. So possibly this is a good setting if you have a variable refresh rate monitor. I hope you do, because this seems to be a pretty good setting for you to use, which is actually pretty cool. I know we are upscaling from 1080p to 4K, but still playing at median settings. I do think it's a pretty good result, and despite we are not getting 60, again we are actually getting above than 50. I think it's very respectable. Even regarding VRAM, we are using around 8 gigabytes. Alright, it's raising because it's loading more of the map, but 8-9 gigabytes, yeah, 8 to 9, so we still have VRAM to spare in case you want to play with this resolution. So other settings that I did try out at 4K, it was okay. So last settings, basically 4K low settings with textures on maximum quality and TAAU performance. Again, it was just to show you compare the comparisons with the previous median setting that I did show up, it holds up above 60, but not entirely. Alright, so it's still a kind of complicated experience in that sense, but as you can see, it kind of holds above 60 for the most part, but it is expected to drop. Low settings does look pretty good, but still, it's a big downgrade. I also tried the game with median settings, just like the previous one, but with ray tracing and their strands, and performance was pretty great at 50 frames per second or something. Outside of this, I also tried the game with the eye settings with TAA at quality mode, but performance was erratic and lower than 30. So essentially that's it. That's all that I want to talk about Assassin's Creed Shadows on the RX 6700 XT. Hope you did enjoy the video, and I do hope to see you soon. Goodbye.